Okay, I think I'm live just a little early. Wanted to make sure I got on in time. Okay, so it is noon now, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Corey, and if you're new here, welcome. So glad you're here. If you are returning, so glad you're back. I'm really excited today because this is my first time doing a live painting session. I have done other lives, but they were just me kind of talking about an art topic. This time I'm actually, as you can see from all my materials on screen, I'm actually going to be painting today. So really excited to have you here. Feel free to comment in the chat if you have any thoughts, questions while I'm working, and that way I know you're here as well. So feel free to add a comment in the chat just so you know. A couple housekeeping things first before I get into this painting. There is a little bit, hi Alex, I'm so glad you're here. So there is a little bit of a delay between when I'm actually speaking and when you enter your chat. So I think there's a little bit of a lag time between what I'm actually saying when you see it and then when I see your chat. So I will eventually, if you ask questions, I'll be trying to make sure that I'm looking up at my chat throughout the session. So then if you ask a question, I will eventually get to it. So that's what that is about with the live session. And it's always fun to have that little lag time. So yay, but I'm so glad to see people. Yay, oh my goodness, there's a few folks. I'm so excited you're here with me today. All right, a couple things just about today's painting. So this is a little 5" by 7" piece of watercolor paper. It is Canson XL. That is my favorite, and any of the supplies I would normally recommend are linked in the description. I am an Amazon associate, so I do earn a commission on qualifying purchases, just so you're aware of that, and that also is stated in the description. So yes, I've got 140-pound weight cold press watercolor paper here. I cut it down to size to 5 by 7 inches. I want to make sure it was small enough that it would fit on screen today, and you can probably tell, I know it's fairly faint, but I do have an outline sketch on here of a toucan. And I did use a reference image from unsplash.com. They have royalty-free images, which is fantastic. If you would like to see what that original image looks like, it is also linked in the description, so feel free to go take a look at it. And let's see, anything else I need to cover? Yes, I also have some of my brushes over here. Hopefully these are the only ones I'll need today. I have a flat brush, a size 6 flat brush from the Artigria set. Again, that is linked in the description. I also have a variety of silver limited black, it's the Silver Limited Brush Company, and then their Black Velvet line has really wonderful watercolor brushes. They're a bit spendy, but they are worth it. So I have several different sizes of my round brushes that I'll be using today. And then of course my palette is kind of custom made. I use a variety of different watercolor paints from a tube. So if you're curious about my favorite brands, again, they're down in the description. Alrighty, I'm gonna go ahead, let's see there's anything else I want to say before I get started. Yeah, I think so. If you are new, if you happen to not know me, I love watercolors. I have always been interested in art, but watercolors were not always my jam. So when I first tried them, I just didn't understand them. It didn't go well. So I abandoned them for a long time, came back to them years later after still drawing and doing all kinds of different other mediums, working with other mediums, and something just clicked. I fell in love. I've been working with them ever since. Over a decade now. And so I'm just really excited to be able to share what I know with you in this session. It's going to be a little more advanced. And I will talk about, as I'm working, my online courses a little bit, because I do have them. So if you are interested in learning more about watercolors, I do have online courses that take you step by step, sequentially through all the knowledge I wish I'd had when I first tried watercolors. So that is just something I would recommend if you're really wanting to dive in with something more comprehensive. But otherwise for today, you're just gonna get to see me do this painting in real time. I'm gonna try to finish it. I don't know if I'll be able to, so I'll get as much done as I can in the time we have. I was thinking I would go a maximum of 1 hour. So if y'all can stick it out that long, maybe I'll get done before then, who knows? It's always a surprise, so we'll see. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to add in the chat. I'll be periodically looking up so that I can see them. Alrighty, oh, one thing, I do have a jar of water over in this upper left-hand corner, which is covered by me. So just know that if you hear a swishing sound, that's what I'm doing. I'm cleaning my brushes in the water. Alrighty, I'm gonna get started, and I have up over here on another screen the reference image that I'm using. So if you see me looking this direction, that is why, so that I can see what I'm actually painting. So I'm starting off with my size 12 round brush. You can see it still comes to a decent point, but it has a lot of bristles, so I can get some detail work done, but also fill in larger areas all at once. So I kind of dipped my brush in the water, and I typically like starting with the lighter areas of a painting, working light to dark. So I'm going into my cadmium yellow light here, and I'm just gonna lay in a bunch of yellow on here, just go to town. Now, I don't have it super thick, but I also don't have it really watery. I want this paint to be flowing nice and easily and loosely, but I don't want it to be so thick that it starts leaving streaks behind, or so watery that I get this huge puddle starting. So it's just very, very loose, very easy to lay down. I'm working fairly quickly here. I'm thankful for that drawn boundary with a graphite pencil. I always, when I'm doing something a little more advanced where I want to make sure I have accurate proportions, I definitely use a pencil sketch, a graphite pencil sketch, very lightly on the background, just so I can make sure all my proportions are correct before I start painting. So we're gonna get nice light lemony yellow. And so this is the wet on dry technique. I had a dry surface and I'm laying down wet paint. And now I really want to go ahead and use the second primary watercolor technique, which is the wet on wet. I'm going to go into my Hooker's green here, because kind of around this section of the face and the eye, there are some green tones amidst those yellows. So when I use wet paint on an already wet surface, you can see how the edges just fan out. Everything blends together really nicely. Makes it really great for getting sort of gradients or variated tones, and you don't get any like beach ball striping. So, so it's really nice to use that wet on wet technique. And just add a little bit here. Small touches, it really doesn't take much. You can always add more, but it's a little harder to take away. And every time I go into a different color, I always rinse my brush, blot it, and then go in. I do want to get a little more yellow back in here because it sort of faded a little bit. I'm actually going to go to a slightly darker yellow. It has a little more of a golden tone to it. This is just cadmium yellow, regular instead of light. Go in here. Smoothing out those edges. When I smooth out edges, I blot the excess moisture out of my brush on my towel here, and then I just go in kind of where the edge of the paint is, where I want to soften things up, and just very lightly kind of lift some of the paint off, spread it around a bit. And since we live in a dry climate, I live in a dry climate, it can definitely dry very quickly, sometimes a little faster than you want. So I sometimes have to go back and add a little more moisture again. And there's some shadowing kind of on the sort of upper portion of the bird's chest. So I'm gonna go into my sepia brown here. Whoop, I got a little too much. See, there you go. I rinse my brush and blot up some of the excess. There we go. That helped tone it down a bit. Like I said, sometimes you'll get a little more than you need, and there are ways where you can kind of lift that paint a little bit, but it's always easier to start with less. And I see there's a hello peeps, yay! Yes, yes. So it's an underdrawing is so helpful to give a framework to follow. Agreed. That is so true. Okay. And I'm gonna go back in with a little more of my regular cadmium yellow. Something about watercolors that you learn fairly quickly is that layering is kind of a key thing, especially as it absorbs into the paper. A lot of the time, the pigment you initially laid down is gonna really lighten up and not be maybe as vibrant as you initially thought when you first laid it down. So waiting for things to dry and then going back over the top with more layers and getting successively more detailed as you go along is really gonna be helpful for just building up dimension, making it look more accurate, a little more true to real life. So don't be afraid to build up your layers, which I'm gonna go do again because I think we really, I don't know if y'all have had a chance to look at the reference image linked in the description, but when you look at it, the tone on this bird, on this toucan, is super vibrant. So I just want to make sure I'm doing it justice. That really helps bump it up to the next level of kind of realism. Now, eventually, I'm going to be switching to a more detailed brush, especially when I paint in this eye. So for now, I'm happy that this comes to a nice point, but when I'm doing this really tiny, fine detailed stuff, you're gonna see how this itty bitty brush is gonna be really helpful. So there we go. And there's just a little more green right around this eye. We got a little bit of shadowing. So I'm staying right on the tip here for maybe some of these kind of fine lines. There's almost like a crease or a groove here, really. Oh, and I forgot to fill in this part. This little itty bitty spot needs some yellow on it. One of the reasons why I start working light is because you can always, watercolor is very different from like oils and acrylics because you can't really paint over what you've already done. I mean, obviously, like I said, with building up layers, you can, but it's not like, oh, I painted something really dark, now I can go over with a light color and the light color will just sit on top. It'll start mixing with that dark color below and then just all run together. So you have to almost work opposite. You have to maintain your highlights, which, you know, means painting around the white of the paper so that the white of the paper is your highlight, and then working dark over light instead of doing your darks and then adding highlights at the end. So it just takes a little bit of a brain flip. All right, I think I am. I have my mouse, you can see part of my mouse pad over here. So I'm gonna zoom way in. I know you can't see it, but I'm telling you what I'm doing. So I have on my second screen here the photo of the bird, and I'm scrolling way in on it so that I can really see what's, going on with that eye. So I have now switched to this super fine size 0 detail brush. That's like one of the smallest you can get. I think there's like a 00 that's even smaller, but this is perfectly sufficient. So, all right. And I'm gonna go in, actually, same principle. There's a bit of a green ring right around the outside of the eye. So I know it might be a little hard to tell on screen since I'm not zoomed way in with this camera, which, by the way, I have my phone above my head, which is what enables you to see my work surface. So if occasionally my head, there it is. See, I have this lovely ring light holder kind of thing. So if my head occasionally disappears because of that, that's why. But yes, all right, back to it. So very lightly laying in some green here. I did really shade in with some pencil here to help guide me a bit more with filling in this eye, but all of those pencil lines are gonna get covered up. If you start with a pencil sketch, you wanna make sure any areas along the edge are light enough where when you paint right to the edge of it, the watercolors will cover it over and make it disappear. Thankfully for the eye, I knew that I was gonna be working really dark with black, so it was gonna be just fine to shade it in a little bit because I knew I was gonna paint right over it with a really dark, opaque color. So to really get that deep tone with watercolor, you wanna make sure you have very thick paint. And when I say thick, I mean not watered down. Obviously, it's not so thick on here that it's globbing or creating big blobs of paint. My brush still comes to a fine point, but it's thick enough and not watered down so that when I do lay the paint down, it looks more opaque rather than super watery. You can see how detailed and careful you kind of have to be. So this portion where I am getting a little more detailed is going to take a while. And the other thing is when you have such a tiny brush where there aren't a lot of bristles, you have to really run it over your paint several times. A lot of the time what I'll do before I get started, which I did actually do before I started this session, is I took my eyedropper, got some clean water, and just put several drops of water in my palette to help activate those paints. But even so, sometimes you still gotta go over multiple times. You know what, and this is such a fine detail brush, I'm needing a little more help. So I'm actually gonna switch to my size 6. I wanna try and fill this in just a little thicker. It takes a long time with a tiny brush because you have so few bristles. So let's see. This will be a test of my control. The more I stay on the tip of a larger brush, the finer control you gotta have with it. So there we go. That's really helping to darken things up. And I know my hand may be blocking just a little bit of that detail as I'm working, but eventually as I move on, hopefully you'll be able to see it pretty decently, get an idea. But this just kind of goes to show how sort of careful and methodical you may need to be, especially if you're wanting something a bit more realistic. Now for something a little more abstract or looser paintings, you're not gonna need maybe quite as detail-oriented type of mindset. So, but just keep that in mind. All right, I am going back in. I needed to darken up this little bit of a green ring right under here. Lighten it up here. And so there's a highlight in the eye, but it's not as dramatic as this is, so as white as this is. So what I'm gonna do, I rinsed my brush, blotted the excess moisture off, and then I'm just very gently gonna pull some of the black that I've already laid down into that highlight. And there we go. Now, if you get a little too much, if you went a little too dark, which I did actually in one section, there is something you can do. It's called lifting, and we'll see if this itty bitty brush will do it. So again, I rinsed my brush so it doesn't have any pigment in it. I blot the excess moisture off, and then I'm gonna go in just one tiny section and kind of go back and forth, just run over. And then I'm gonna take a clean towel and then just blot that up. May have to do it a couple times. That clean damp brush, just run the bristles very gently back and forth over the area that you want to lighten up, and then just do that. So there we go. Now his eye is in a little bit better of a place. Gonna start adding more detail. There's like I love how birds, like right around their eye, they have almost these like squinty grooves in the skin around their eye. So I'm just adding those little kind of lines, dents. And that ring right around his eye has a little bit more of like a black kind of outline. So I'm adding just hints of the black paint here. Make sure there's no new questions. Thanks again, everyone who's joining me. I'm so glad you're here. It's really, it's just a gift to be able to share what I love with other people, and I just hope it, you know, brings a little respite to your day, or maybe a little instruction if you are interested in watercolors. Like, that is something I really love doing, is helping others discover how fun watercolor can be as well, especially since I struggled so much with it when I first started. I want to help others get past that hump before, if they want to try it themselves and not have to worry about experiencing some of the pitfalls I initially did. Okay, so we are starting to see some stuff take shape. I'm gonna zoom out on my image over here on the other screen. Oh, and there's my forehead, it disappeared. Oh, that's too funny. Okay, so now I think the next section I want to work on is this beak. There's a lot going on. There are, let's see, like 5 primary colors in there, and then sort of transitional colors between those. So again, I'm gonna start with the lightest, which is actually, I neglected to clean up the mixing wells on my palette before doing this, so my bad. So normally, if I want to mix up a new color, I would go ahead into one of these paint wells and do that. In fact, let's see if I can get that. You can, so paint here, mix here, but you can also sort of mix directly on your paper. But I'm gonna see, since I already had this sort of kind of deep green here, I'm adding some of that cadmium yellow light. Rinse my brush, add some more. And there we go. I have a decent sort of lime green kind of tone here. And that's what I'm going to lay in right on this upper portion of the beak. I'm starting fairly watered down. Again, I can always go darker by adding more layers. It takes a little more work to lighten things up, especially with green. For some reason, green is a very heavily staining color, even more so than red, I would say, a lot of the time, which you don't like. Normally when you think of a heavy stain, you think of red. But green watercolors, whatever pigment they use, they just tend to sink into the paper a lot quicker, and they're more challenging to lift off. So I always start with a very light hand when I'm working with green. So there is this lovely highlight right in this upper portion of the beak, which is why I kept it really light right there. I'm gonna really make sure I don't overdo. Oh, and yeah, I actually did a little bit, because it's also a bit of a highlight right at the top here. So I'm lifting some of that paint just a little bit. Here we go, get it back lighter. And then there's kind of this darker portion sort of right under that highlight. So something that I really love about working from reference images, or also from life, you can have like a still life sort of setting in front of you, which works really well. But whenever you're referencing something to do your painting, you just really want to try and what you're seeing, duplicate that on your paper as much as possible. So a little bit of like a secondary highlight right in here. So moving the paint around a little bit right there. And you can see it kind of created a slightly darker strip right there. Oh, okay. It's a halo. I don't know what that was referring to, but that's cute. Like a halo around the eye. Maybe that's what you were talking about. I like that. Okay, now I am going to go into my cadmium orange. That's kind of the second lightest color on the beak. And it's in this little section right here. So we're gonna lay that in. And I'm being careful to really paint within the lines here. Again, that wet on dry technique where you're putting paint down on a dry surface for the most part, especially if your paint isn't really watered down, it's gonna stay right where you place it for the most part, which is exactly what I want. I really wanna kind of stay in those lines because the coloring on this beak, unlike here, where I needed that wet in a wet technique to make things transition smoothly, this has a little more definition between the different colors here. So I really want to make sure I'm keeping that clean edge, painting within my lines. I'm actually going to carry this orange sort of all the way to the tip here because there is kind of some orange highlight at the tip of the beak. So, all right, let's see. My next color, I think, oh, I need to do the bottom of the beak. So I'm gonna go back to this yellow-green color that I mixed up, and we're gonna go right here. Skipping over this little section, which is gonna be black. And there's a highlight right here, so I'll try and leave that free. This green on the bottom is a little darker than the green we see on the top, so I do want to make sure I add plenty of pigment this time. Whoopsie. See, I went outside the line. Lift that up a little bit. There we go. Such a different experience painting live. I have lots of videos on my channel, and most of them, well, all of them, I have recorded beforehand. So it's just a fun, different experience to do it live, where y'all see the mistakes I make in real time. It's humbling. It's good. All right, this lovely blue, it's a really warm blue, so it almost has some green overtones to it. So I'm using my manganese blue. You could also use a cerulean blue if you have that in your palette, or a cobalt blue would work as well. Go right in there. Okay, so I filled that in. That looks pretty good. It did blend a little bit with the green, but not too much. Darken this. There we go. And so I guess while I'm kind of working here, I'll put a little more orange down on this bottom section. Oops, that was too thick. When the paint's too thick, you just add a little bit more water to your brush, and that really helps. Again, looking at the lightest color that you have in the sort of section you're working on. So when I look at the beak on the screen, I can see that even amidst this red, the edge has some orange to it. So I'm going ahead and just laying it down over that whole section, and I will ultimately cover quite a bit of it up with the red tone. But again, that's what's great about watercolor. The more layers you have and you build up, the more sort of realism and vibrance you will get. Okay, I'm thinking this red, this is a very intense red that's on the beak. So I'm gonna start with cadmium red deep. And then if I need to add over the top, I can do that. that center section between the division of the upper beak and the lower beak, it has a little bit of a highlight. So I want to try and not paint over that section. All right, and I actually already have a somewhat deeper red kind of already mixed up. I'm trying to remember what I used for it. I think there was definitely some alizarin crimson in there, which is a very cool red. It has almost some purple tones to it. I think I also might have used some brown madder, which is this color. It's a very deep brick red almost. So that's great. It's this very rich dark tone. I love it. Starting to take shape. It's very exciting. We're about half an hour in, so we'll see. We'll see how far I get. What I may do, and feel free to leave comments in the chat to let me know what you think. So I can either, at the end of an hour, if I'm not done, like stop and then pick up where I left off next week, if I think there will be enough to fill the time next week. Or I'll just finish this on my own time and do something new next week. So let me know what you think. If there is enough of the painting left where it could fill another session next week, let me know if you would like to see the rest of this painting live, or if you would prefer that I just move on to a new, something new. And I can do that as well. So a lot of this is just repetitive, detailed work. You do have to have quite a bit of patience. That is just something that I think when I first tried watercolor, I was lacking. Ooh, that's a great question. So someone put in the chat, do the detail brushes help you protect the white areas? And to the degree where it prevents me from, going outside of the area that I'm painting, yes. So there are other methods for completely preventing yourself from painting over the areas that you want to keep white. There are like masking fluids or masking pens that you can use. I personally have not had as much success with them. I did buy a masking fluid a while back and wanted to try it out. So the way you apply masking fluid is very similar to paints. Like you would get a brush, put it on the areas where you don't want, like where you could just paint right over it with the watercolor, and then it masks the white from preventing getting colored. Then when all your watercolors dry, you kind of rub off that masking fluid that has dried, and then your white of the paper is maintained. However, at least the brand I bought, it did not do a very good job. It didn't really mask it as well as it could have, and it ripped some of the paper as I was trying to rub it off. So I was like, all right, that wasn't ideal. The other drawback is that if you use brushes, you have to have a dedicated set of brushes that you only use with masking fluid, because even if you rinse your brushes of the masking fluid right away, it does some damage. So you wouldn't want to use really nice brushes like this with masking fluid, because, ooh man, it would do a number on them. So I just prefer to get a really detailed brush and paint around all my white areas. And then if I have to cheat at the end and use some permanent white ink over the top with a detail brush or a pen and nib, I will do that. But yes, there are that masking fluid. At one point, I think I want to maybe dive a little more into masking fluid at some point and see if I can get it to work for me the way I would like. Because it is advantageous to be able to, let's say there was a bunch of white spots on here, I could have put masking fluid down, or if I wanted to keep this branch all white, I could have laid the masking fluid down, let it dry completely. Then I could just paint completely over the watercolor, even over that masked out portion. Then once the watercolor dried, remove the masking fluid, and then I'd have this clean white surface that I could paint on after. So there is definitely an advantage to that masking fluid as a tool. Great question. Sorry, I know I went on and on about it. Okay. So a lot of the sort of techniques and skills that I'm using here are really, it's just all about building your foundation, which is what I do with those online courses. I think starting simple and basic and really getting the foundations down is just so crucial for any endeavor, really. If you want to improve at something, getting the basics down is just really helpful, and then you can get more advanced the further you go along. So again, that's just something that I share. Like, I have a whole session in the so I have it in 3 different kind of words are escaping me, y'all, sorry. English is hard. But so I have kind of 3 different tracks you can take with the watercolor class or the watercolor course online. So I have a watercolor basics, intermediate watercolor, and watercolor like a pro. And they sort of build on each other. So the watercolor basics is like, okay, you're just wanting to kind of step in a little bit, and you'll get sort of the basics of how watercolor works and behaves, as well as get to do like a practice painting at the end of the session. And then the intermediate course has the exact same content as the basics course, and then it adds on to that with going more in depth with color. So there's a whole module about like color mixing, some color theory, things like that, and then working up to sort of the process and method of painting. So that's kind of, again, it just gets progressively more advanced with the skills. And then finally, that watercolor like a pro course has all the same content as the intermediate and beginner courses, but it also has a real-time tutorial of like a very realistic apple, and it has bonus videos in each module as well. So it's just something that I specifically designed because I thought, what would I have wanted when I first tried watercolors that would have helped me? And after just working with them for so long, it's I think helpful to be able to think about what all did I need to know and then lay it out that way. So that's specifically how I designed them. All right. Oh, I forgot. We have like these fun kind of stripes going on here, like zigzags. So I'm gonna go into my Hooker's green. It's a very dark green, but it might not quite be dark enough for what I'm wanting on the beak here. So I'm gonna add a touch of, what do I wanna do? Tiny bit of Payne's gray. Oh, not enough. There we go. See how that goes. This is the coolest looking toucan. I mean, we know the ones that have the orange and yellow beak and then the white and black, but this one is just, he's handsome. He's got it all going on. He's attracting all the lady toucans, I think. You can see how I've really stayed with, for the most part, the same size brush. Oops, a little too much there. So when you find the right brush that allows you to do a lot of detail but also fill in areas, that's really nice, and then you don't have to necessarily switch back and forth, but that's always an option, is being able to switch out your brushes. There's not really any wrong way of doing that. When you find a brush that you're really comfortable with and that fits you and the style that you're painting, you know, go for it, stick with it. I need a little darker. There's a lot of precision work on this one. It's maybe not as loose as some other paintings I've done. So I just having fun with it. Okay, there's a little bit of kind of this dark line between kind of the upper beak and the lower beak. So I mixed some of this sort of black tone I had over here with the red, and I'm gonna kind of go in here, darken things up a little. And we'll go right on that line too. Here we go. Okay, so for now, I may come back. I always, when I'm painting, especially when you're working in sections, sometimes when you get one section done, think, yep, that looks good, move on to another one. When you get that done, especially after I fill in the black, that's gonna really help me determine if whether this is dark enough, whether all the colors on this are dark enough. So I may revisit, but for now, I'm calling that good. And now I'm gonna go into my black. Actually, I can already tell that this needs to be a little darker. So I'm going in with some clean water. And luckily my water hasn't gotten too dirty yet. It's getting there, but I do like to try and keep my water as clean as possible. I'm gonna add some actual black this time. That wet on wet technique. Aw, thank you. Yes, so thank you. Someone commented on my setup and how it seems to be working very nicely. I'm so glad. I thank you for the feedback because yes, since this is my first time painting live, I was like, you know, looking into the software that would allow me to not only have my workspace showing, but also me. Because again, it's like, you don't need to see me. That's really, you probably see me just making really funny concentrated faces while I'm working, but it is kind of nice to not just have this disembodied voice just speaking. You can actually see me. So yeah, I'm so glad that that's working well. Okay, that looks good for now. I'm gonna start in with some real black here. I'm gonna get real dark. See, and that is not dark enough. You see how too much of the white of the paper is showing through and I have just too much liquid moving around. Now it's fine for kind of a first pass, but I do ultimately, I wanna get some of that moisture out of the brush. Ultimately, I wanna get it as dark as I can this first time around, since I know I want it to be really dark and not have to worry about going back over it too many times. Whoops. One of the biggest challenges with watercolor is finding that balance between having enough pigment in your brush, enough water, and, you know, addressing what you need in the moment. So like when you need a little less water, you know, making sure you blot it out of your brush, but then sometimes you'll go, okay, I don't want as much water, and you'll blot it out, but then your brush will be too dry and you're like, okay, now I need to slightly re-wet it. So it is all about balance, and it's, you know, even after years of experience, sometimes you're not going to get it exactly perfect the first time, every time. It does take, even after years of experience, sometimes you go, well, all right, that didn't quite didn't quite have the balance correct on that. Needed more pigment, needed less pigment, needed more water. And that just comes with practice, that you'll get better at it as you go along. Now, something that's happening in this lovely bird's head, you can see how I'm kind of just have these random little spots that I'm painting around where the white of the paper is showing through. In the reference image, there is this like glistening, I think actually in the photo it's raining, so this cute little toucan has like little water droplets on his head. That is what these little white pieces that I'm letting show through are. And you can, I'm almost just hovering over the surface of the paper and just like kind of gently blotting right on the tip when I do that to let the white show through. If you didn't do that and just kind of went for it and covered this all in black, you could, one of those methods I mentioned earlier of getting white, you could take some permanent white ink and go over the top once your watercolor had completely dried and just put just little itty bitty dots on there to kind of achieve that little water droplet effect that's happening, or these little glistening dots. But I figured I might as well just show you how to use that white of the paper, because that is, in my opinion, now, you know, everyone has different thoughts and methods and things that work best for them. So some other folks might be like, yeah, totally not worth it to me to spend all that time painting around those little spots. So they would just go back with the ink. So if that's what they like doing, perfect. For me, I do think the rule of thumb for myself is to try and use the white of the paper as often as possible when you can. Sort of unadulterated, I guess. It feels more pure. All right, we're getting there. I've got like 15 minutes left, so we'll see how far I get in that time. I knew for sure, like, no matter what, however I paint this sort of branch that he's sitting on, it's going to be a little more loose and abstract. It is definitely not going to be as detailed as the bird himself is. And that is something that I really like doing with my own style of painting. I really like having a subject, so like an animal, a person, a flower, whatever it may be, super realistic as I can get it. And then having a bit more of a sort of surroundings that are a bit more abstract, loose, kind of a little more whimsical or fantastical. Again, that's just my preference and my style. I know that doesn't suit everyone's taste, but it's my jam and I'm sticking to it. So some of this, I haven't been speaking exactly what I'm doing, so just because a lot of it is a repeat, but you can see now one of the really crucial reasons why I laid that lighter color in first is because now I'm going over with the black, and I can very easily use the tip of my brush to create these itty bitty feathery type textures and protrusions into the yellow, and it makes it look like more of a feathery texture. So if I had initially done the black and then wanted to go over with the yellow, all of this detail that I am filling in, that would disappear, because if I put the yellow over the black, the yellow would activate the black paint. So that's the thing about watercolor. Even after it has dried on your paper, if you get it wet again, and if you get it really wet, it reactivates and starts moving around. So you have to really make sure that any colors you're using are not going to mix with each other. Whoops. I went a little too far on that. Let's see. Lift some of that off. Let it dry. That's okay, actually. There's a little bit of like a shadow over here, so we'll let that go. You can also see how it's a lot easier for me to like lift black off of the yellow because it's just sitting on the surface, versus like the yellow, I wouldn't be able to see over the black, so I wouldn't be able to see what I would need to lift, if anything. So, ooh, I forgot. There is this gorgeous, very dark red strip right below the yellow. So I'm gonna lay that in first. Very finely. And this is, in this case, I'm actually mixing on my paper. So I laid down a tone, which was the brown madder. It's that brick red. And now I'm going in with alizarin crimson right over the top. Just beautiful, beautiful dark tone. I could even add a tiny bit of Payne's Gray, which is like this really deep blue. I might have gotten a little too much. Just a little bit. Let's see, what other color can I use to get this darker? Let's try the, I think this is good. Let's try the, 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 let Oh, I always forget what it's called. Brain, come on. It's a purple of some kind. Dang it. I'll have to like think of it next week. Every time I use it, I'm like, oh, why do I forget what it's called? For some reason, it just will not stick in my brain. That's too funny. At least I'm consistently forgetful of what it's called. Oh, there was a little bit, let's see, I need more black. Right over here on this side was a little bit of that glistening effect as well, so I'll get a little bit of that. There we go. You can see what happens when my brush gets too dry, too much of the white of the paper shows through. So actually, I want to fill in a little more quickly, so I'm switching back to my size 12 brush. Try to get slightly thicker paint. Oh, that's such a good question. So someone asked, do you recommend adding another color into black to give it more value variation? Yes, actually, a lot of the time I do. So there's a couple different things. I usually use Payne's Gray in conjunction with black because I feel like Payne's Gray just adds a little more richness to the tone and makes it look even darker at times. So I like doing that. Something else, like this brings up a conversation about what, you know, you could call like not using local color. And when I mean local color, I mean like the expected tones. Like for instance, it doesn't have to just be with black, but for instance, clouds. When we think of clouds, we think, oh, there's going to be gray and blue and boom, that's it. But honestly, clouds themselves and a whole bunch of other things, shadows, will have a whole variation of tone in them. The key is getting it to the exact value. So like, for instance, I could use in a reflective shadow I could use reds and greens and purples and blues and all kinds of colors, as long as they are dark enough that they match the tone, the darkness of what an actual shadow would be. Our eye reads it exactly how it's supposed to, and it actually even adds a little more like richness to the tone, as you were saying, or like value variation. So that's a really, really great question. For some reason today, I don't know why, I may like switch. Let me just add some of the Payne's Gray here. Just to show you maybe a difference of how you can get that kind of tonal variation. So this kind of big section I laid in right here has a bunch of Payne's Gray in it, and now I'm sort of switching back and forth between the black and the Payne's Gray. And the black I use, it's called ivory black, which has always, to me, been really funny because ivory is supposed to be like white. So I don't know, man. I didn't make up the naming system I wasn't at that table when they said, let's make up names for paints like ivory black. What are you thinking? So maybe the reason why they called it ivory black is because it's a bit more of a flat black. And when I say flat, I mean it dries very matte. It almost has this grayish tone when it dries. It's a very different black when I initially lay it down and it's wet versus when it dries. So that's another argument for using another color over the top or in conjunction with, especially ivory black. Now there are other blacks that you can get. For instance, I think Mars black or lamp black, especially Mars black. They tend to be darker than the ivory black when they dry. They don't have as much of a sort of pasty look to them, is perhaps the word I'm looking for. So yeah, wonderful, wonderful question. Make sure I haven't missed any others. Now, let's see. I've gotten to a point here where I have my cute little feet. Not my feet, the bird's feet. And I want to go ahead and try and fill those in before I do the black so that I actually follow my own advice where I say work light to dark. So in this case, there's kind of a bluish gray hue to them. So I'm going to go ahead and use my Payne's Gray watered down to, oh, not enough water in the brush. There we go. So I'm going to do a very light sort of wash, basically, loose wash over those feet, excepting the spots that are highlighted. So like there's a little bit of a highlight on this left side and then on this top part of the toe here. And I know I'm almost running out of time. So let's see. I think what I'll do is, I'm torn. I really don't know if there would be enough of this left to save it for next week and continue where I left off and just continue in the live session, or if I should finish this outside of that and maybe I'll just show you in the live session next week. So feel free, you guys, let me know what you would prefer. If you want me to kind of pick up with this painting where I left off in the live session next week, or if you're okay with me just finishing it on my own time and I'll be able to show it to you next week. Like I'll show you the finished piece and then start something new. So I'll stay on for a few more minutes to give you a chance if you have a preference to share what you would like with me. And yeah, we'll go from there. But let's see, kind of closing thoughts. Nothing's coming to mind right now other than I'm really thankful for everyone who joined me today. Thank you so much. It's so fun seeing your comments, and thanks so much for engaging with me, asking questions. That makes me, really happy that I'm able to answer and maybe offer assistance for folks who are curious. So yeah, I'm going to be going live the next 2 Fridays. So July 19th, and then I believe that final Friday is July 26th. It'll be at the same time, 12 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Oh, I have a vote for finish it off and have a fresh image next week. Okay, yep, I like that. I like your thinking. So yeah, because what I could do is have a video separate, like that's just, posted later, and that's not a live session, and just showing the ending of this painting. So maybe I'll do that. Yes. Okay, so far I've got 2 votes for finishing it off on my own and posting separately next week. So I like that. I think that's what I will do. So perfect. Let me see. Final thoughts. I sometimes just wing things. And so I had like some thoughts of like, okay, I know like some things I want to talk about in the intro. And then for the outro, I'm like, all right, here it is. Y'all just, I don't want to leave you hanging. Yeah. Okay. Another vote for a fresh image next week. Show this image at the beginning. 100%. I will do that. Awesome. Thank you guys. Yes. I want to, we'll see what I love doing animals, so it's very likely I'll do another animal next week, potentially a plant, or like a flower. I've also thought, like, I love drawing people and painting people, but that would be one that would be too much for one session. That would be like a 5-6 hour session. So I'll probably stick with something fairly simple that's an animal or a flower or a plant, something like that. If you guys have any suggestions, feel free. After this live session is done, you can always go back to this video. It'll be on my channel for replay. You can always add a comment on that video and tell me like, hey, have you ever thought of painting like this subject matter? And so I'm happy to take some suggestions into account. Ooh, yeah, zoom in on the image so far. Here's what I'm gonna do. Sorry, I don't wanna give anyone motion sickness. I'm gonna try and go slowly. There we go. You can see my beautiful setup. Oh, scooch. My bad. All right, hopefully that gives a little better of a view of what we got so far. So it also gives you a good idea of, you know, how much you can get done in not too long amount of time. So the sketch itself took, probably 20-30 minutes maybe, and then in technically less than an hour worth of painting, because I was talking at the beginning. So maybe we'll say like 50 minutes worth of painting. This is how much I got done. So, you know, when you get to that point where you're feeling more comfortable with watercolors, you can kick them out fairly fast. I'm thankful that I've gotten to that point. When I first tried watercolors, definitely not. It was taking much longer to do something like this at this level. Yes, thank you so much for that suggestion. So glad, yeah, so glad. I will have to remember to zoom in. If I had finished the piece, I would have like just lifted it up. Ooh, one final thing before, I know we're at 1 p.m. I'll keep you for just a couple minutes more and then I'll sign off. So I use blue tack, which is this lovely, it's almost like putty. No, here, we'll just go ahead. There you go. It's like this little blue substance that I got. So I have like a large roll of it. I use that little dots on the back. I think I have like dot here, here, here in the middle on the 2 sides and on 1, 2, 3 here. It really helps secure it to the surface. You can also use painter's tape, which works fine. I didn't have any painter's tape with me today. I am dog sitting, so I'm not in my normal studio, but so yes, blue tack is something I highly recommend. So, and I don't have it linked in the description, so I'll maybe do that after. I'll do that after the live stream. So awesome. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining me today. Again, my website is linked in the description, so you can get to know more about me there, find my online courses, find my online art shop, sign up for my weekly email newsletter if you're not signed up for that. I just send an update once a week with news, info, tips, links to videos, things like that. So I do know that this, the way the live works is that if I were to say bye and then sign off immediately, it would cut the recording off. So what I'm going to do is say au revoir, say my farewells now, and then I'll wait for about 10 seconds to end the session. And hopefully then in the final recording, I won't just get cut off and the audio won't get cut off. So again, I'll say goodbye now and then sit for a bit. Thanks everyone for joining me. I hope to see you again next week and have a fantastic weekend.